While it's hard to believe right now that anything good might come out of this crisis, there will be some things. And for those who've been keeping an eye on the environment, particularly as it relates to energy, the realization that we can do less driving, less commuting, less flying, and so on, well, this points to a potential opportunity. To give us the pitch for that, here are, in Chelsea, Quebec, Stewart Elgie, founder and chair of the Smart Prosperity Institute. In the nation's capital, in Sandy Hill, Céline Bak, president and founder of Analytica Advisors. And in Seton Village, in the provincial capital, there's Brendan Haley, policy director at Carleton University's Efficiency Canada. And it's great to have you three on TVO tonight. Two rookies, Céline. How about this, eh? Céline, you're a familiar face, but Brendan and Stewart, it's great to have two rookies on our program. And I want to start, let's put the rookies to work right away. Stewart, tell us something positive that you see happening environmentally as a result of this pandemic.
I was going to say spending more time with my kids, but environmentally, I guess the big thing is people have gotten used to the fact that we can live our lives with a lot less long-range travel and short-range. So a lot less flying, not commuting to work, doing meetings by web like this or TV interviews. Transportation is a big part of climate change, and so learning that we can get by and do well with a lot less carbon-intensive transportation is one change I hope will endure coming out of this.
Céline, how about you?
Well, I think one very important change is that we're really much more aware of natural spaces around us, because the time we spend outside is really precious, and I think we're starting to get a greater appreciation of just how important having space in nature, and I think increasingly we're going to learn about the role that nature can play in helping us get the better of climate change.
Brendan.
Well, I think people are more aware of the need to anticipate societal vulnerabilities, and that should make us more aware of climate change, which can produce vulnerabilities such as extreme weather, infectious diseases. But also, as we're spending more time at home, I think people are more and more thinking about the importance of health, the importance of the comfort of their homes, indoor air quality. And I'm hoping that'll increase interest in energy efficiency, because we know that when people, upgrade insulation, upgrade heating systems, they're seeking improvements in health and comfort first and foremost.
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? So, Céline, pick up on that. People are seeing the changes. You've mentioned a few of them just now. We've seen pictures in our newspapers and on television of cleaner skies in big cities all over the world. How much do you think any of this will spur on people to change their behavior for a greener planet?
Well, I think it's going to be fundamental change, and we are seeing that already with people taking over the streets of their cities, which have been previously dedicated to more individual transportation modes by car, now taking over space for safe walking and safe cycling to get to and from the things that they still need to get to. So we're seeing change already, and I think also an appreciation of the potential risks that pollution bring to air quality, and how that may actually be associated with some of the hot spots of the pandemic. So a lot more attention on the impacts of small particulate pollution and what that means to our health, and potentially into increasing vulnerabilities in terms of the coronavirus and the devastating effects it's had on many, many parts of the world.
Stewart, since you are a first-timer here, tell us the Smart Prosperity Institute. What does it do?
It's Canada's largest environment economy research network and think tank. So we look at how smart public policies, pollution pricing, green tax cuts, targeted infrastructure, how they can drive clean growth that helps both the environment and the economy. This idea that we have to pick between the environment and the economy is really old thinking. If you look at the most successful countries and the most successful businesses, they're really ones that excel at driving environmental performance and competitiveness. And really that's the transition that we need to make now coming out of the recovery. As we're about to make a once in a generation investment in rebooting Canada's economy in the weeks and months ahead, it's really critical that we not just think short term and get people back to work. That's job one. But we're really spending the next 5 to 10 years of economic investment in the economy now. We're spending tomorrow's money today. And it's critical that we use that to build the economy of the future, which is going to be a clean, low carbon economy across all sectors, from manufacturing to resources to technology. So let's get people back to work building the economy of tomorrow.
And a quick follow-up. Do you see that kind of broad-range thinking happening among our decision makers right now?
Well, if you look traditionally, when governments are in a time of recovery, they tend to get caught in short-term thinking, and it's understandable. There's a real urge just to get people back to work. The last week, when the government announced its loan program for large businesses, they included a requirement that they have to do long-range climate planning and disclosure. That's a good start. A great example would be what Obama did in the 2009 recovery, when the US bailed out the auto industry with billions of dollars. But the condition was they had to move to making much more fuel-efficient vehicles. They brought in tough new standards in exchange for getting these massive loans. And it actually helped the industry not just reduce emissions, but come out of the downturn more competitive because they were now making the cars of the future. So it's that same kind of approach of driving recovery investment in a way that pushes us towards the clean economy that's going to create the jobs and wealth of the next 10 to 15 years in this country.
Brendan, same to you if you'd follow up on that. How much evidence of a green stimulus plan do you see among our decision makers right now?
Well, I definitely think it's triggering a rethinking of the role of public policy and of governments, really in protecting people, but also in grappling with these large-scale societal challenges. And COVID is one, and climate change is the next one. And I think this idea that the government can't afford to respond to large-scale societal challenges is kind of out the window now. And we need to take that same type of thinking to climate change. And to follow up on Stewart's point, I'm hoping the discussion actually just isn't about short-term stimulus. I'm hoping it's about the type of direction for investment and innovation that we need over the next 3 decades, because solving climate change is really a 3-decade project.
In which case, I'm sure you think we better get a move on then if it's 3 decades to go.
Yeah, we got to get going.
Céline, let me ask you this. It's interesting. We're all spending a lot of time at home these days. And I wonder whether you think that's giving either policymakers or residents a notion that retrofitting our homes to make them more environmentally sensible is a good way to go right now. How much of that thinking's happening right now?
Well, it's interesting. We're actually having, by the day, there are announcements of other countries in the world establishing priority projects that are being financed with tens of billions of euros and pounds in both the UK and Europe to accelerate the process of upgrading our homes in order for them to be net zero. So the opportunity to electrify all the heating, which today is based on fossil fuels, to increase by 70% or more the efficiency of the building envelopes what wraps around our house and makes it possible to vastly reduce the amount of energy that's required to make us comfortable. And at the same time, produce enough electricity that that buildings, whether they're apartments or commercial buildings or our homes, could actually have the capacity to charge electric vehicles, so that we could actually have the benefit of both the clean air that comes from converting all of our vehicles and transportation that has to be motorized into electric vehicles, and then at the same time have much more comfortable homes that no longer require fossil fuels to heat them, because of heat pumps that are much more efficient for both the space heating as well as for heating water, and much more efficient building envelopes. It is literally a daily occurrence right now. So we had the EU make a major announcement yesterday of a massive green deep retrofit program, and the UK has also done that just today. So I'm hoping that we get on that bandwagon because it means putting so many people to work. In Canada, if we retrofitted 6% of our housing stock every year for the next 10 years, we would be putting literally 300 to 400,000 people to work every year to make our homes and our workplaces more comfortable.
Brendan, do our decision makers know this, and are they on this?
I think energy efficiency has been a bit of the unsung hero of climate policy. Renewables is a little bit, sexier at times, but the thing with energy retrofits is in terms of economic recovery, it's so key because it creates a number of jobs. 60% of the expenditure on a typical retrofit is spent on labor. It creates those jobs throughout the economy. It has important spending multipliers because people save money, respend that in the local economy. And it also can really be a new area for private sector investment. As I said, it's a multi-decade investment proposition of multiple billions of dollars. To get up to the type of retrofit rates that Céline just mentioned, we're retrofitting about 0.6% of the residential and commercial building stock per year right now. So that has to be increased dramatically if we're going to meet the decarbonization objectives.
0.6%. So, in 200 or 250 years, we'll have the job done. That's great.
Right.
Not fast enough, I guess. I'm inferring from your comments. Stewart, it's been pretty apparent that governments all over the country have moved, as the expression goes, PDQ, to get money out the door to help people and protect them against the ravages of this pandemic. I wonder how you encourage the same kind of lightning quick reaction as it relates to dealing with the environmental issues that we're talking about tonight.
No, it's a great question. And I think part of the challenge we've faced in the recent years is that government is not exactly what you would call a nimble, agile, risk-embracing entity in our society. And the response to climate change here, while Canada has done more in the last 4 years than almost any nation on earth to tackle climate change, we were starting from way behind, and we've got to pick up the pace, quite frankly, if we want to do what some of our competitors are doing. There's some really specific examples that probably can relate to people. I talked about Obama and the auto industry in 2009. Trump, of course, has just done the opposite. Trump has just lowered US vehicle emission standards through his kind of misguided race to the bottom view of competitiveness. And it's a great opportunity for Canada to hold the line and keep moving ahead with tougher clean car standards, partly to generate jobs. One of the reasons that GM Oshawa got shut down is because GM's moving to building more electric cars, which are the next generation of cars. We've got to be making those in Canada. So if we reinvest in helping the auto industry rebuild, let's do what Obama did and do the same with aviation and airlines. They're going to need some real help coming out of this. And there's lots of things they can do to build the next generation of aviation that help tackle climate change. Lighter planes, shifting to biofuels. You've even got the capacity to use all electric planes on short haul flights, as Harbour Air is now doing in Vancouver. So as we reinvest in kickstarting the economy, let's make sure those public dollars drive our industry towards where the jobs and growth are going to be in the future, which is in a clean economy.
Well, Céline, we've talked, as the movie title goes, planes, trains, and automobiles, and we've talked about homes as well. But let's continue with heavy industry. What kinds of transformations can heavy industry do starting now to take advantage, if that's the right expression, of the circumstances we find ourselves in?
So there are, I guess, two kinds of industry. I mean, we can refer to sort of smokestack industries like cement and steel. As well as manufacturing industries that in some cases use heat for their processing, and we're thinking about all of the important manufacturing and processing companies for our food, for example, that are doing an amazing job in making sure that our grocery store shelves are stocked and so that we can continue to have relatively good access to food, et cetera, during these difficult times. The bottom line in terms of the heavy industry is basically we need to electrify everything that possibly can be electrified. And we need to establish standards for procurement of steel and cement that are made with the greenest possible processes. Again, in the rest of the world, when big infrastructure works are commissioned by government, whether those are new public transportation infrastructure or other important users of steel, buildings, et cetera, and cement, they require that low carbon versions of those commodities be used for a certain percentage of what is procured for those investments. And so for us to decarbonize those heavy industries, we need to make markets for them. And that's done in part through public procurement and also through subsidizing or increasing the sort of price on carbon that we're prepared to pay. A lot of this comes down to the fact that just like we had in the very, very early days of the automotive industry, prices or costs come down over time. So whereas the Model T Ford cost $25,000 in the beginning of its manufacturing, it cost $5,000 later on. The same thing goes for steel and for cement. In terms of the light industry, it's actually a very similar story. We need to be able to electrify what is currently being heated and produced with natural gas. And that means using electric heat pumps, just as we would for our houses. So similar kinds of technology, which of course gives an opportunity for us to manufacture some of those heat pumps here in Canada, because the volume would be sufficient to warrant that. But we'd also need to just be really thrifty as we try to be in our homes these days with any heat that exists already. So whereas there would be heat sources from a manufacturing plant that are in excess of their needs, we'd use that heat, for example, to produce food in a greenhouse nearby, or to recycle it into the industrial process, so that all of the efficiency can be gained out of the energy that's been already spent.
Brendan, let's do a little. Yeah, please come on in.
I agree with Céline fully. I want to just give one specific example to help people drive that home. So aluminum, Canada is now the first place in the world making carbon-free aluminum. It's one of the most emissions-intensive industries historically. 2 years ago, the government of Canada joined with Alcoa, Rio Tinto, and Apple to invest in a new facility in eastern Quebec called Elysis, which has found a breakthrough technology to actually make aluminum with almost no carbon emissions. And not only did we join in financing that, the National Research Council has expanded its research capacity to help develop the technology, build the skills and training in that area. So it's a really good example of how we can take an emissions-intensive industry and position it to generate jobs and growth of the future, and to lock up those jobs for Canada. That's exactly the same kind of approach we should be thinking about across all sectors, as Céline said.
Well, Brendan, let me follow up with you on some not too far in the past history, and I want to go back to the Great Recession of 2008, which was another opportunity for governments to spend billions upon billions of dollars. I don't think we didn't spend as much as we're going to spend this time, but at the time, it was a record level of deficit spending in order to protect people from the ravages of that Great Recession. Can you tell us whether our governments took advantage of, if that's the right expression, of that crisis in order to help transform our economy the way you would like it to happen?
Well, in Canada, we did not. There were some programs that were supported. In particular, there was a residential retrofit program that was ramped up. South of the border in the United States, they spent about 8 times more on green types of infrastructure, green types of initiatives than we did in Canada. But really in both countries, I mean, that support lasted for about 2 years and then was quite quickly removed. So that retrofit program I talked about was canceled and actually created a lot of disruption in the sector. So I'm hoping for a more durable recovery. We need to talk about, yes, short-term stimulus, and actually we're much better prepared this time around to ramp up a lot of programs quite quickly, because we've been taking action on climate change in the last couple of years. So we have that existing policy infrastructure, things like the Low Carbon Economy Fund, which is a funding mechanism that can be ramped up almost immediately. But we also really need to think about finding that direction for investment and innovation that will last for the next number of years, thinking about that path for investment that did what the buildup of the suburbs did, that did what the Cold War did in the 20th century. And I think to accomplish those things, it's not just a 2-year stimulus, it's a long-term public investment strategy. And that's what the climate needs, and that's what I think the economy needs, because we actually really never had a full recovery from the great financial crisis. We had a decade of what economists call secular stagnation. We had a decade of insecure and precarious work. So I really hope we think about this one differently.
Well, Stewart, that was then. This is now. It was a different government back then. It's a different government today. But are you seeing the signs that we may have a different outcome this time, and that our current governments in Canada will actually take advantage of the pickle we're in and make the right decisions this time around?
It is a pickle, and obviously the main read right now is to provide income support for families and businesses who've been disrupted by this, and I think governments are doing a pretty good job of dealing with that current need. If you look back at 2009, what's interesting is we saw a downturn, the same thing we're seeing now, is emissions go down as economic activity goes down, obviously. But in the recovery after 2009, 2010 actually saw a 6% global increase in greenhouse gas emissions, the largest increase we've seen in decades. So last time around, we didn't actually do it right overall. We invested in a lot of carbon-intensive stuff that actually put us on a worse trajectory to tackle climate change. Now, as Brendan says, the good news in Canada is we've seen more government and private effort to drive a low-carbon economy the last 4 years than anywhere else, not just carbon pricing, but phasing out coal power, public investment in clean growth, working on methane reduction. So there's good signs that we're already underway. One positive sign is the announcement last week for loans for large industry did require that they do disclosure of climate risks, which is what more and more large investors are requiring, as well as long-range climate planning. And that's just smart economics. You know, if you look in the last year, some of the largest investors in the world, BlackRock, the Norwegian pension fund last week, have announced that they're cutting off what they consider to be high carbon businesses. So it's smart for our growth and our economic future to be thinking ahead about being climate smart. And that should apply to all parts. I mean, it should be, we haven't talked about agriculture, but there's lots that farmers can be doing, for example. There's this great new example is precision agriculture, where you can actually go out and figure out by looking at soil conditions, temperature forecasts, exactly how much nitrogen fertilizer you need to apply on the soil at any time. And that reduces the need for these petroleum-based fertilizers significantly. That not only helps the climate, it avoids a lot of runoff into our waterways that creates pollution, and it saves costs for farmers. They're more efficient. And there's a great Canadian company, Farmers Edge, that's one of the leaders in making this stuff. So across every sector of the economy, it's important, possible for us to help drive innovation and growth to start building the jobs and economy of the future.
Well, Céline, I should ask you about that program that Stewart just referenced that the federal government announced last week. I think it was for large businesses with revenues of at least $300 million a year. And yes, if companies wanted help with a federal subsidy, they had to say what they were going to do about climate change, but they also had to open up their books and allow federal regulators to look at the state of their books as well in order to see whether they're eligible for this subsidy. And I guess I want to know from you whether or not those caveats that have been attached to that program are too stringent to make the program valuable in terms of the environmental impact that it could have.
Well, that is an excellent question. The standard, the global standard now is not to just disclose the impact of climate on a given company, but it's to clearly plan to reduce the company's impacts on the climate. So that means making a commitment to reaching net zero emissions by 2050. And it generally means making a commitment to reducing all emissions by the company, including the combustion of the product, in the case of oil and gas companies, by 50% from here till 2030. So it's actually not enough just to disclose what climate risks are associated with the business. And I would say that I take it a step further by saying that there are many companies in Canada whose environmental liabilities in the form of wells that have not properly been shut in the oil and gas industry, and other liabilities that have not been properly accounted for on their books, where those actually exceed the assets of the company. And so for a company to ask for public money to go through these difficult times, it's important that Canadians have the opportunity to scrutinize whether or not any given business is a going concern, and if it has followed every legal obligation it has to make provision to be able to pay for the reestablishment of the land and the natural resources that its operations may have compromised. So I think we need to hold the potential borrowers from this program to a very high standard. And I say that because that's what's being expected in the rest of the world, in Europe and in other countries that have very well-established standards for supervision and regulation of the financial disclosures of publicly traded companies.
Brendan, I should follow up by asking you about the situation in Western Canada right now, namely the oil sands, because people will be expecting me to ask you whether, again, this crisis that we're in right now presents, in a strange way, an opportunity to utterly transform that energy project from what it is to, I don't know what, geothermal, carbon capture, storage, I don't know, you make a list. What are the possibilities of that happening right now?
I think when we experience disruptions like this, we need to think about a sector as not just the physical resource, but really what's in a sector is that amalgamation of skills, of legal institutions, of some of the physical infrastructure. It's actually a whole bunch of different assets and skills that can be used in a variety of different ways. So one example that I've worked on a little bit is geothermal energy, and how some of the drilling skills, some of the exploration activities for oil actually also help us explore for heat. So there is a linkage there where some of those assets from the oil and gas sector can transition over to geothermal energy. There's other really interesting examples with hydrogen, with perhaps biofuels, but even in other sectors. I mean, in energy efficiency, we know that there's stories of former oil and gas sector workers who have developed careers in energy efficiency because there's transferable skills in terms of construction. That work is closer to home. That work is less dangerous. So even if the oil sands are facing some disruptions right now, which frankly I'm not too sure if they're going to recover from, that history of oil and gas development in Alberta provides assets and skills that can be used for economic recovery.
Stewart, I want to ask you a partisan political question, which is, I know that if you had a choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I shouldn't say I know, I got a pretty good idea who you'd vote for, given that choice. On the other hand, Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee for president, came out yesterday and said he'd cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. And there's a lot of people in Western Canada who will not be happy with that, starting with the Alberta government, which has got billions of investment into that line as the private sector has withdrawn from it. Figure all that out for us, if you would, and tell us what we should make of it all.
Yeah, in 10 minutes, 10 seconds or less. We're in the middle of an economic transition, as Brendan and Céline have said, where the world is moving from the energy source that's powered us since the Industrial Revolution, fossil fuels, towards a different, cleaner kind of energy economy. And that transition is going to be with us for the next 10 to 20 years. In fact, you can look outside your window and already see it beginning. You can see more electric vehicles on the road. You can see wind panels and solar turbines. Most people, other way around. You can see high efficiency homes people have been in. So the change has already started, and it's just going to keep gathering pace over the next decade. What that means for oil and gas is that ultimately we're going to move towards an economy that uses less and less oil and gas. And I guess the one area where I would differ with some of my environmental friends is I think this idea of trying to block the supply and production of oil and gas really isn't the right solution. As long as we're using the product in our cars, in our homes, for our planes, oil and gas is going to come from somewhere. And either making it in Canada or we're importing it from somewhere else. So yes, we have to clean up our production in Canada, and that's really important. But the single most important thing is to begin driving down demand for oil and gas. And that's an area where Canada can make that a compelling, powerful national project that brings us together rather than rips us apart, east versus west. So instead of blockading oil pipelines, let's blockade internal combustion engine cars. Let's try and push for more and more investment into making electric vehicles, hydrogen buses, energy efficient homes. That's the kind of thing that can actually generate jobs and growth. And frankly, that'll do a lot more to reduce oil emissions than simply trying to shift production from Canada to elsewhere. So I'm sympathetic to the fact that the oil sands has a heavy carbon footprint. And they've got to keep cleaning that up, and we've got to have regulations and support that makes them do that. But if we want to move towards a low carbon economy, and we're already beginning that direction, we've got to drive down demand for the product by shifting to alternatives for our homes, our transportation, and ultimately our jobs. We've got to be making the things that a low carbon global economy wants, like shifting from making gas guzzling cars to making highly efficient green cars or fuel efficient trucks. That's Canada's economic future, not these big battles east versus west about trying to block oil.
Steve, if I may,
Céline? Sure.
could I follow up on that? I just wanted to emphasize that the politics of climate change has fallen into the very traditional Canadian regional politics. And one of the issues with oil is it's very regionally concentrated in Alberta. Hydroelectricity is very regionally concentrated in a couple provinces. One of the benefits of some of the solutions we're talking about is that they're all throughout the country, the solutions. So energy waste is everywhere. It is a resource that we can all exploit in every single province in this country. Same thing for the diffusion of an electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So some of these low carbon solutions aren't going to fall into some of the same political problems that we've traditionally had in Canada with the politics of regions.
Céline, we got a couple of minutes left here, and I wanted to ask you one more thing, and that's about mass transit. We have been, I guess, making up for a couple of decades of doing very, very little where it comes to mass transit, particularly over the last few years. I know in the capital city of Ontario, there's a new line, of course, in the nation's capital. We've gone gung-ho on building new transit. But now we've had this pandemic hit, and there's going to be a lot less commuting in the months and who knows, maybe years ahead, if we all end up working a lot more from home. Did we make a mistake by putting so many billions into mass transit right now? And maybe should we shut some of these projects down if it looks like we may not need them after all?
Well, we're going to need mass transit, and we need to make sure that it's going to be ready for us when we're going to need it again. We're going to need some transitional alternatives to mass transit in the form of active mobility corridors that dedicate roads for us to be able to walk and to cycle to work where that's an opportunity or an option. But no, we can't afford to reduce the investment that we're making in mass transit because we're going to need to rely on it. And in fact, we're seeing, again, other regions of the world are stepping up major announcements just this week for a doubling down on rail, on electrification of rail, and increasing the amount of investment that's going into that. I would say that in order for us to be able to do that, though, we also need to invest in another kind of infrastructure, which is transmission lines that take advantage of the resources that we have, from one province to the other, building on what both Stewart and Brendan have said in terms of working together east to west, having that national dream of a completely electrified Trans-Canadian highway, of a really robust transmission grid between Alberta and British Columbia that enables a province like Alberta that has $85 billion worth of opportunity in terms of renewable energy to attract that investment. And on the basis of that completely decarbonized electricity grid, we should be continuing to invest in mass transit, both for short inner city distances and for intercity transportation as well.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. That's our time. I should say one last thing, just in thanking all three of you for coming on the program tonight. Stewart, I don't mean to embarrass you at all, but for those who trip to your last name and are wondering, yes, you are the son of the former Bill Davis cabinet minister, Dr. Bob Elgie, who was, frankly, one of the most admirable people and politicians I ever knew and I ever covered. So you are certainly a chip off the old block, as he was of your grandfather, who was also a great man in public life back in the day. Sorry if that embarrasses you, but I wanted to put that on the record anyway. Céline Bak, Stewart Elgie, Brendan Haley, good of all of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.